36 Streets by T.R. Napper. This is what we are doing a spoiler-free review of today, and it is a wonderful, wonderful cyberpunk thriller. Let's jump into it. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Adrian. As I said, we are doing a spoiler-free review today of 36 Streets by T.R. Napper. For those of you who don't know, I am not massively into cyberpunk. This is my first real cyberpunk book that I have read. I have really enjoyed a lot of modern sci-fi thrillers, but cyberpunk is not something I've been massively into and I've tried much of. But this for me was a really good introduction into the cyberpunk genre. So in 36 Streets, we mainly follow Lin, who is a Vietnamese orphan raised with an adoptive mother in Australia and now back in Hanoi in Vietnam. This world is very much a futuristic cyberpunk world, cyberpunk setting in which Vietnam has been invaded by China and is still in the midst of a war with China, but the north is currently occupied by the Chinese. The south is not currently. And we follow Lin on the 36 streets of the old quarter of Hanoi. Lin is part of a gang, one of the biggest gangs in the old quarter. Lin is second in command of this gang, and she gets called in to help an Englishman who is trying to solve a murder. And that's sort of the setup for 36 Streets. So as you can see here, this is very much a mystery plot initially. I think that it's done very well. It turns into very much a mystery thriller, and then towards the end there's a lot more literary comments on lots of different themes, and I actually think the theming of this book was a real big strength as we got towards the end. This is very much a cyberpunk thriller. The chapters were very, very short, which I loved. They felt very punchy. There was always impetus to keep moving with the plot, and I thought that was great. And one of the real strengths here from T.R. Napper's writing is the character of Lin herself. I think that she starts as this kind of detached, badass gangster that we don't know much about. But then as we get to know her more, we get some flashbacks, we get to understand her family dynamic, what's going on in the gang. I really like the way that she's developed. I really like her as a protagonist. She has this classic, dark, brooding heroine with a difficult backstory, but it's one that we get to explore, and actually we get to see much more of her and her humanity throughout. And I think that's a real positive for this book, is the character work and the character exploration of Lin as a main character. As well as getting to know our protagonist Lin really well, we also really get a deep and heartfelt feel for the world that we're in. We get a real visceral sense of the old quarter of Hanoi. You can tell that the author has lived in Hanoi for a while, or at least in Vietnam. It definitely had that very realistic sense of a place, and I really enjoyed getting that feel of this city, how it works, what it's like, even in a future tech, even in a cyberpunk setting, which obviously isn't what it's like now. It definitely maintained that feel of a real city, and I think that was written really beautifully and really well to convey that sense of feeling. I really love the prose in this as well. It is very concise. It's got that sort of futuristic, streamlined voice to it, which I love, yet it's still very poignant. Now, a really sneaky and surprising positive about this book was the way it handled its themes. Now, these aren't themes that are heavy-handed at the start. They are very subtly woven in right at the beginning of this book and all the way through, and then towards the end we get much more meaty punches of this theming towards the end, and I think that's done very well. So these themes that it particularly addresses are themes of patriotism or nationalism, themes of occupation and rebellion, and then themes of memory and themes of thought patterns, how we think about things, how we remember things, and how things manage to work their way into our head. I particularly enjoy that at the beginning of this book, in the first third to a half, I didn't really think this book was going to be delving into many deep themes at all. It felt very much like a punchy, exciting action thriller. But in those really exciting, punchy, action-filled moments, Napper was clearly laying the groundwork for a deeper discussion on memory and nationalism and patriotism, and it's done so well. And I particularly love the way that Napper does that at the end. In the falling action towards the end of the book, there is plenty of time for us to dwell on and discuss and consider and think about these themes that have been there throughout the book, but in subtle and small ways. And I love the more overt discussion that we get of that in the last couple of chapters. I love that we get a more clear and obvious discussion between the characters about some of these themes. Some people might find that a little bit on the nose, but I think it was so subtly worked in at the start, they made perfect sense to have a more upfront and obvious discussion of these themes as we got towards the end. And as you can see there, I have loads of positives to say about this book. I've just reeled off a whole bunch of things that I really loved, I really enjoyed about 36 Streets. And I was racking my brains this evening, I was thinking, right, what didn't I like about it? Like, why won't this be an all-time favourite? And in reality, it's pretty close to an all-time favourite. For my first ever real read of Cyberpunk, I loved it. I thought it was incredible, it was gritty, it was just awesomely done. If I had to try and find a negative, I would say that the plot towards the end was a little bit simple. The conclusion was a little bit simple. But that is really me trying to find negatives, yeah? That is me trying to find negatives, which, why should I? Like, I really love this book. It was an absolutely rapid read. I blitzed through it in a few days. I absolutely adored the characters. I adored the setting. I think it was done so well. I love the discussions about war and resistance and memory and all those themes that were brought together towards the end. They'd been set up subtly at the start. They hadn't been discussed massively at the start. They'd just been set up in amongst the plot, but then they get discussed a lot more at the end. And I think that was done super well, super subtly, and it just worked with the setup that had been given for it. It's always absolutely awesome. I have put this down as a 4.5-star read. I am very likely to change that. I am very likely to make this a 5-star read, I think. I just want to see how it sits with me. I want to see how I feel about it in a week's time, in 2 weeks' time, when I've thought about it a little bit more. See if it's still something that resonates with me, or whether it's something that is like, oh, that was a good read and I've moved on. But it's at least a 4.5-star read. At least I can easily see this becoming a 5-star read. As far as sci-fi standalones go, absolutely adored it. As far as I'm concerned, big recommendation. If you want to get into sort of a current real world Earth but futuristic cyberpunk sci-fi, I cannot recommend 36 Streets highly enough. I absolutely loved it. I hope you found that useful. If you want to see more of my content, check out this video up here. This is for another sci-fi work that you might enjoy. And hopefully I'll see you guys again soon.